And as promised, we welcome Dr. Tim McKnight to the studio for our talk with the doc. Summer has shown itself, and unfortunately, that brings some poisons. We call them poison plants, right?
Right. Yeah, these
What?
the poison ivies, and we can get it around the house and in the woods, and sometimes we don't know where we get it, and we don't know what it is until we have somebody take a look at it.
Not knowing what it looks like can get you really in it, so that's important.
It is. It can, and I mean, I'm pretty comfortable. I think most people know what poison ivy looks like, and the mantra is "Leaves of three, let it be." So you can Google these images, and poison ivy and poison oak are both leaves of three. Poison ivy are on the East Coast, which is probably what we have the most, east part of United States. And you see more poison oak west of the Rockies. So I'm not sure we're seeing poison oak. But then there's poison sumac, which those are leaves of clusters of 7 to 13. There's a little blackish type of spot on that, and they often are in wet areas near bushes and trees and wet areas. So I think we have poison sumac around here. I was thinking there's a leaf that has 5 leaves that was poison oak, or I'm sorry, poison sumac, but I don't think that's the case. So I'm careful about a plant, and I probably don't need to worry about. But I do worry about poison ivy because I had it really bad, especially as a kid, where my eyes were swollen and I was miserable. So what happens is there's a chemical irritant. It's an oil-like resin called urushiol, and it's in the genus family of plants called toxidendrons. And really, it's this oil that gets in the skin, and the body is looking for proteins that it doesn't recognize, whether we eat it in foods or it gets on our skin. And when it sees this protein on the oil, and it may be the oil itself, the body recognizes this is foreign, and you get this inflammatory reaction, just like you would get with any other inflammatory reaction. And when that happens, you develop the rash. So the most important thing we can do is obviously stay away from it, and if we think we're exposed to it, we need to try to get it off as quick as we can. About 50 to 75% of us are sensitive to these oils, and 10 to 15% of us are very sensitive. So these are people that are coming in the office or calling because, like when I was a child, with the eyes swollen shut and just miserable with it. So it's the sap on the skin, especially if the plant has been damaged anyway, it opens up that sap, and when it gets on the skin, it takes about 10 to 20 minutes for that oil to penetrate the skin, to bind to the skin where the body's going to react to it. So if you've just been in the garden or you in the bushes and you think you're exposed to it, you get in and wash it off quickly, you can get it off. Now, I always thought it was soap and water to wash it off, but it's actually just water. And I'm not sure why the recommendation is water, because it's an oil. But what they're saying is that when soap rinses it off, it can actually spread the oil.
Yeah.
And the other caution that I thought was pretty important was they don't recommend warm water, because that can open up the skin pores and allow it to penetrate deeper into the skin. So you got more of a problem. So it takes, again, 12 to 14 hours for most people after an exposure to start to have the reaction to it, and it can spread up to 2 to 3 weeks after you've got it. So it starts, of course, with itching, and then develops into redness and swelling, and then you get the little papules, the little spots that kind of blister, and then you get those vesicles that are just fluid filled, and those look like blisters essentially. Those big those big blisters, like you smacked yourself with a hammer or something. Same kind of thing. A lot of people, and I used to think this too, if I scratched it enough and I opened those blisters, it would spread the rash. Well, the oil is not in those blisters. That's just the local inflammatory problem. So the blister is breaking doesn't mean you're going to spread it. But the oil's on the skin, yes, you can spread it by scratching. And that's for providers, if we're not really sure what we're dealing with, if you see these linear lesions where you can imagine somebody's taking their fingernails and scratching their arm, and you see a line of these little vesicles and it's red, you're probably looking at poison ivy. So we obviously don't want to do that. Another way we can develop this, so this is usually direct contact with the plants, but it can also be on our shoes, on gloves, clothing, and tools. And that's the one where I think some of us get into trouble, because we might have a rake or a hoe or a shovel, and we're in around the bushes around the house, and maybe that resin has got on from a previous exposure.
A
and now we're picking
handle,
it up.
yeah.
Right, yeah. So it's probably a good idea. We talked about chiggers and other bug bites. It's probably a good idea when you're working outside to wear some type of garden glove, just because there's so many things you can get on your hands and under your fingernails. But I think most people also know that animals can get this oil on their fur. So we can, a cat or a dog that are in the woods and we pet them and we're like, we weren't even outside. Now we got poison ivy. Well, that could have been a reservoir or way for it to spread. And then I think some people also know that smoke can spread it. So you're cutting wood down around the house or maybe in the woods around you. And a lot of the poison ivy has vines that will grow around the trees. So you're cutting this down and maybe it looks like that vine has died, but there's still oil in there. And so now you're sitting around the campfire and that the oil evaporates with the smoke and it blows in your face. You can get it in your eyes that way. You can get it in your lungs, your respiratory tract. And so these can be pretty severe reactions. So if you have breathing difficulties, don't delay on that. Just get to the hospital because we can give you some pretty powerful treatments to open things up.
That sounds pretty severe.
Yeah,
I mean,
it can be really dangerous.
Can that close your lungs or begin to?
It can. Theoretically, it can. So that's where, you don't want to just sort of blow that off. You have to be seen pretty quickly for that. And they're even, I've heard people say, well, the Indians, American Indians, they would develop the immunity from this by chewing on the leaves. I don't know if that's a wives' tale, but you can, by swallowing those leaves or any of those oils, you can have inflammation in your intestinal tract as well. So I wouldn't recommend trying that. And I'm not sure what that inflammation looks like, but it doesn't sound good.
I think they did that to prisoners, actually.
Yeah, that would have been torture for me.
Right.
I would have said, I'll tell you whatever you need to know.
Right.
So what's the treatment? Well, again, we want to try to wash this off within 10 to 20 minutes.
With cold water.
Cold water is the remedy. Now, for a long time, I heard Paul Harvey way back in the day talk about this treatment called Zanfel. And it's a paste that you can still get at most pharmacies. It comes in a toothpaste kind of a tube. It's a gritty paste that you put on your skin. You kind of rub it on, and then about 5-10 minutes later, you wash it off, and that's supposed to get the oils off. I don't know how effective that is, but I've used that before. It seems like it's helped. But again, I think if you wait too long and that oil penetrates the skin, you're not going to get the oil off really with anything. You're going to have the reaction.
As a victim, though, I mean, mostly you're just trying to get rid of that itch so that it's not torturing you.
Right. That's true. But you're itching because the oil has reacted to your skin, and your skin and your body is causing this inflammatory response, which makes you feel miserable. And again, if you're one of these really sensitive people, you're going to really have problems with it. So, other things that you can do for comfort is calamine lotion, oatmeal baths. I remember doing that as a kid when I had it really bad. A couple cups of oatmeal in a kind of a lukewarm bath, and let that just drip dry, and it kind of dries it out. You can use Burroughs solution, and then you can use cold compresses. You want to make sure your fingernails are cut so you're not spreading the oil or scratching it further. They really don't recommend the over-the-counter hydrocortisone cream or Benadryl creams. They're not. Benadryl is an anti-itch. Hydrocortisone is anti-inflammatory. It doesn't seem to benefit too much. But then other people say, well, yeah, you can use some hydrocortisone cream. If in an early case, it might help you. But really, what's probably going to work the best are the antihistamines like Zyrtec, Allegra, Benadryl, which is sedating. They can all be sedating. And then if it's bad enough and you're one of these sensitive people, we'll use oral steroids, a steroid taper. And we have to be careful with that because if we can knock that inflammation down with a pretty good dose of like prednisone or something like prednisone, but if you come off of it too quick, it'll rebound and come back. So usually it's about a 10 to 14 day taper of the oral steroids. Sometimes we'll use a Kenalog shot, which is a long-acting steroid. And for those people that are more susceptible to this and they're going to be in the woods, sometimes they want that Kenalog shot at the beginning of the year when they, in the springtime or when they're going to be in the woods. Maybe they're going to be hiking or camping.
Preventative measure.
It can be preventative. And sometimes that does prevent that because it blocks the inflammatory response to a lot of things, including these skin reactions. But the steroid injections, whether it's for allergies or to prevent poison ivy from flaring up, you have to be careful that you don't rely on that too often because it suppresses the immune system. It can cause your cataracts to develop a little bit faster at an accelerated rate, and then it can be hard on the bones. It can lead to more osteoporosis. So for some people, every now and then with Kenalog shots, not going to be an issue. But if you're doing it 3 or 4 times a year for years on end, you're probably going to pay a price at some level to do that. So I think the main thing is just recognizing what the leaves look like, knowing that you need to get that off quickly. You want to have your fingernails cut. And then if this gets out of control and it's spreading, getting worse, and you're miserable, there are medications that we can prescribe from the office. So there's a couple of tips there, I guess, and probably the main thing is just to recognize what those plants look like. Just Google it. Most people, I think, know what poison ivy looks like.
So if you have it and it's on your skin, can I get it from you at that point?
That's a great question. I'm going to say the answer is probably not, because it really, the oil, I have to somehow spread the oil to you, and that would potentially, if you're wrestling, potentially yes, but you're just nudging somebody, no. And again, you see somebody with all these blisters, and you think, oh, that's terrible looking, and I want to stay away. But the blisters that is not filled with oil. That's just your body's reaction to the oil on your skin. So you'd probably be okay.
They're way past that.
Yeah, you're past that, and hopefully you can get that under control and find some comfort in the treatments that we offer.
All right. Well, we hope we don't have too many people to see you for that. So.
Well, it happens, but a lot of times they just call, and we know, this is again. They had it last summer, and we just call something in for them.
All right. Very good. Well, that is Dr. McKnight. So if you run into the poisons, now you know how to handle that. Here on our Talk with the Doc.